what kind of low end this track is going to be, because low end is not the same. There's not one song that has the same low end aside from, you know, the 808 bass songs, which it's just 808 bass, so pretty much that's it. Hello everyone, welcome back to McSolaar TV. Hope you're having a great day. I brought back the rapid fire Q&A. So in this series of videos, I'm gonna answer your questions. Before we start, please check the info box down below for my mixing courses on ProMix Academy, free plugin special discounts and offers, and if you want to support the channel. But most important, if you really want to learn how to mix and master professionally, click the join button down here, become a MixBuzz TV member and access the already big and always growing library of in-depth mix and mastering courses, videos and tutorials, full mixes, breakdowns from start to finish, mastering courses with all the settings for my analog gear and plugins, special videos and a lot more. You also get mix consultations with me via Skype or email. Next one is a bit too generic and I don't have enough information, but you know, maybe we can take this in the comments. Summer of George. My recordings are guitar, bass and drums. I can't seem to dial in a full bottom end without the mix sounding muddy. Any tips? Well, again, this doesn't really have a quick and easy answer, you know. First of all, how's your monitoring system? Because most problems in the low end is because people don't have a good enough monitoring system. So you can't mix what you can hear, but you can hear that is not right. So at least that, you know, that's a good starting point. Without hearing the material is difficult. I can give you probably some common problems, which is usually bass guitars and drums. If they're real instruments, they probably have build-ups in the low-mid area, and not necessarily just the low-mid area, like 250, like so many stupid charts out there, they just give you as a default, oh, cut 250, that's like the muddiness. No, it's not. It depends on what tracks, it depends on what song. 50% of the time, that's your body, that's your power. You cut that, you cut your mix's balls. But aside from that, try to understand that the low end is not just one big blob. There's ranges in the low end, okay? You have your sub energy, so let's say from 40 and down. Then you have your body and power low end in the, I wouldn't call it body. Body is more like 120. That's what I think of body. You have your bass range, so 50 and let's say 90, okay? Then you have your body, 120 to 200 sometimes, depending on the kick can be there. The body and the voice of a bass can be there. So first of all, for the low end, as we said before, you need to understand two concepts. That one I really hate, which is, for example, you have guitars and bass, cut the guitars when the bass starts. The mixing is not a puzzle, okay? Elements and instruments are going to overlap. The problem is how much, and the problem is how you control that range. So it's EQ, so quantity, and then control. How much of that range you have and how you control it, okay? So this is very important. Then these elements are gonna probably overlap, kick, bass, and guitar to some extent, okay? And usually is guitars, like let's say 80 or a little lower, they can go if they're down-tuned. Then you have the bass, then you have the kick. But that's not always the case. The first thing you have to decide is who takes these ranges, okay? So the sub range, you can't really have two elements there because it takes so much headroom and you don't really hear articulation there. You just hear and feel the power, okay? So you decide what is gonna take that 40 and below, the kick or the bass. And at that point, you skim down the other element, which doesn't mean you annihilate from 40 and below the kick or the bass. Because that's gonna make your mix sound unglued, and these two elements that need to be glued, unglued. So you just tame it. You can tame it with a dynamic EQ, you can tame it with a slope, with a gentle slope, high HPF, or a filter. Don't completely annihilate it, okay? It can be a dynamic movement right there, but on the sub range, you probably want to pick one element and leave it to that one. Then you have the bass range, so where the body of the bass and the kick are most likely going to reside. And even there, sometimes you can decide which one is going to take that range, but for the most part, they're going to be both there. And because especially the bass, it changes notes. So the kick drum has a fundamental, and one thing that you can do, that fundamental, you can sidechain the bass on that, only that fundamental, to go down like 4, 5, 6 dB, sometimes 10, depends what the song calls for, with a sidechain multiband compression triggered by the kick. That's not a go-to, okay? Don't do it by default. If you have problems, you try that tool. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. If it doesn't, maybe your bass has too much energy there, okay? The energy doesn't need to be at the maximum level all the time. Maybe you want that range to be at maximum power only when the kick and the bass are playing together. Okay, this creates also movement, and that's most likely what we do often. But it depends on the pattern, it depends on how busy the bass is, how busy the pattern, the kick is, and then you have the body. And again, most likely here, all three elements. So do you want to sacrifice a little bit of bark from the bass to give a little more bottom end of the guitars? Or you want the other way around? You want the bass to be the power at the bottom end spectrum. You want the bass to be the main element there, and the guitars just being the articulation and the mid-range and the brightness, or you want the guitar to sound dark and beefy. In that case, you probably have to, you know, sacrifice a little bit of that range on the bass. And then you have to think this one even before all this, what kind of low end this track is gonna be, because low end is not the same. There's not one song that has the same low end aside from, you know, the 808 bass songs, which it's just 808 bass, so pretty much that's it. But for a rock song like It Sounds Like You Have, there's not one song that has the same low end, okay? So remember, when you cut, let's say kick, when you cut a little bit of body and higher, let's say 150 to 200 to 250 on that kick drum, or sometimes even lower, even like let's say 100 on 120, and you have a deep kick, that will make the kick sounds even bigger and deeper. But is that the sound that you want? Is that the sound that track needs? Or it would be better if the bass has that range and the kick drum has more punch. So these are all things that you have to ask, because of course for something like this, there's not a quick answer, there's not a quick chain, there's not a quick presets, there's nothing quick and easy about it. It's multiple decisions that you have to make, and it's never one processing. It's a combination of all the things that we do in mixing, so filtering, compression, sidechaining, saturation. That's another thing. Sometimes you need to use psychoacoustic processes like max bass, for example, to make the bass appear bigger, but in reality you cut the low end. You know, it's just a matter of, think this, that one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest thing that happens mixing is masking. And no, I can't do a lesson on masking because it's it's impossible. It would need to be an in-person session, you know, at 3 days mixing a song with an audience, and that would probably scratch the surface. You know, it would be a full immersive experience to trying to even scratch the surface of what masking and how to deal with masking. But you need to be aware of this. So it's never a matter of how one element sound on its own, especially in that range. It's all a matter of how they blend together. So yeah, I hope this answered the question.
Hands on my neck, hands grip my throat. Lift me up, man, take control.